Let me see. Okay, so good to start. Everyone ready? Okay, so I'm going through advanced functions today. Um, yep, functions are very important. You probably use them a lot, and apparently you've only touched the surface so far. So today we're going to have a recap. I'm going to touch on scope, default arguments, callbacks, and arrow functions. Um, so for the recap, you learned about function declarations. So they're written with the function keyword. So you have the function keyword here, and then you have the name of that function. So in this case, it's login. And then you have your parameters, or not. And then you open the curly braces, and then you have your logic on the inside, and you may or may not, return something from the function. That all good with everyone? I'm going to accept silence as a yes. Um, so parameters or arguments are passed to a function when it's called or invoked. So here we have login, and this user here is most likely a variable, and then we have two strings here, one for the username as seen before, and then one for the password. And then you can have functions with no parameters. So logout doesn't take anything, it just probably has some logic to log that person out. Functions can also return a value to us when we call them. So here we're creating a variable and we're assigning it whatever we return from this function called create full name, which right now here is taking David as the first name and Beckham as the last name, and then this statement here would be true because we're comparing full name, which we just assigned the value of this to David Beckham, which should match based on the logic there, but we can create that right now. So this is called Sandbox Io. Is basically, it's kind of like VS Code in the browser. So I'm just going to use this for the rest of the lesson. So we start with our function declaration. So function keyword, then the name of that function. We open our braces and then add some curly braces. So that's your basic structure. So we want to take a first name parameter and a last name parameter, and then what we want to do is return something like, we can open our quotes and we can put our first name space last name, then const then we can call that function with two parameters. Well, in this case, there will be arguments. And if I console.log coach,
What shortcut do you use to, like when you highlight the whole sentence and put it
so basically in most code editors you can have this option, But if you highlight a word or a bunch of characters, there are certain keys you can press to add stuff on both ends. So it will work for quotes. It will also work for braces and curly braces and square brackets, etc. So you can just experiment with them. I don't know all of them, but
How do you do it? Like,
yeah, you just need to highlight whatever you want to wrap with quotes or braces, and then you just press the key. You don't need to hold Command and Shift or anything like that. You just, in this case, I'm just pressing
okay.
quotations. Yeah.
I've tried to do that with the comment thing, like with the comment
Oh, you mean that?
comment key. Yeah, exactly, and it just deleted my whole sentence. So I was like, I didn't know how to do it.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, it's a pretty useful thing. As you saw when I typed this without the quotations, instead of having to go all the way back and then do that
yeah,
and that, I could just highlight the word and do that. Yeah. Yeah. Um, you can also have a function that doesn't return anything. So function display name. Um, so if you take that full name, let's bring this up here and put full name in there. And then we just make the call to display name with that variable, and we get the same thing. Yep, cool. Any questions?
not for me, no.
Cool. Alright. So, scope. Variables which are declared inside a function are not accessible outside a function. Anything declared outside of every function is in the global scope and is accessible from anywhere. So, in the context of this file here, this variable here is in global scope. And let's say I modify this function to const full name equals, let's say I put that up there, then I do return full name. I shouldn't be able to access full name from out here, so if I put if I do a console log, it will say that it's not defined. It's technically it is defined in this function, but not in the global scope, so it doesn't know, console.log doesn't know where to find this. So these functions are also declared in global scope. But inside the function, you'll have your function scope. It's very important to remember this. In your function scope, you can also access variables in the global scope, but not the other way around. So const title equals Mr. then I can come here within this function and do title, and I'll get that printed out. Any questions?
Actually, why why we add on the first string this quote? So the const full name
Mm-hmm.
we have quotes. Why we have this quotes and why we don't have, for example, some title plus first name plus last name?
Oh, okay. Uh, let's comment this out for now, and let's do const full name. So you mean we can either use these const full name equals. So let's say this is a space, and we do title plus space plus first name plus space plus last name. So that's what you would do normally?
Yeah, I saw this in Crypto10.
Oh, okay, cool. So so you normally you would have, yeah, your double quotes and your single quotes, but now you have these backticks. Yeah, so on the Mac it's well, at least on my Mac it's next to my left shift key, and that allows you to use interpolation, which is what we did on line 7. So you use this syntax of the $sign and some curly braces, and you put the variable in there, and that would use the value of that and put it in a string for you. So this is much more concise way of constructing strings. Everyone has their preferences. I'd rather use backticks because it saves some space. I would say it's definitely a bit more useful too when you're dealing with more complex data. But we're just trying to construct a string. That's all.
Basically, it's the same. You get to the same result. It's just a different way to get to it,
Yeah,
right? So a method.
yeah. So I can do without the pluses and the empty spaces. I can just write. I can even just include, you know, uh,
Text. Yeah.
so I can have normal text in there along with the variables, and it reads much cleaner than if I had this. And then you can see a problem I can run into here where I'm missing a space, so I'd always have to remember to add a space here after the quote. Yeah. I might be able to leave this up for you if you want to play around with anything we write in this editor. But any more questions? Clear on scope? You have global scope and your function scope. Um, just note that. Just always remember that you can't access variables that are defined within a function outside of that function.
If we were used to use var, then I guess var is old school and we shouldn't be using var. Isn't var a bit like weird where you can take the last, you just take the last whatever.
Yeah, var is terrible and you should never use it.
Yeah. Okay, that was
Yeah,
the question.
just always use let and const. And I would say when you're defining variables, just always start with const. And then if you know it's going to change later on, then you can use let.
But so when you do program like really like when you do like proper programming,
Mm-hmm.
is it the case that it's gonna move or not the variable?
So
Here this is wouldn't it be better to put like a let because if someone else comes in and the full name is no longer factory equivalent but another name, then it would be changing.
yeah, so this is a not really a good example where I could change my gender for whatever reason and I'd be a Mrs. So in this case, I wouldn't have this as a global variable, and I wouldn't have it as something that wouldn't be able to change. Let's say to start with, it'd be let title, and then maybe we don't assign anything. Maybe we just declare that that's what it is, and or sorry, no, maybe we start with Mister, and then no, yes, we just declare that variable, and then in here we say title equals Mrs. for whatever reason. We could have some other logic here to then change that. But at the same time, I think in general you should avoid making too many global variables unless you know for sure that they're never going to change. It can trip you up a lot, and because programmers are terrible at coming up with names for things, names for variables, names for functions. Um, the the less you can change something by accident, the better, because you might end up having let title there, and then somewhere later along the line in another file or the same file, you use that same keyword again, and you may change the value by mistake. If you're making something that will never change, like let's say I had let's say I was creating an object and I had a property of my profession, and I was saying I would use capital letters. Um, to say that this variable isn't supposed to change, right? Obviously it can't, so it won't change. But for better readability, at the top of the file, you can declare a variable and set it to something that isn't supposed to change. I haven't seen your exercises yet, but hopefully they try to get you to use less global variables.
I put everywhere let, that's why I was asking a question because I thought it was let, but
Yeah, only use let if you know it's going to change. But when you're declaring variables, always start with const and then go from there. You can always change it later.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. Right. I'll do some more examples at the end just in case. Right, so here we have another function. Let's just copy this. So we have a function create URL that takes a parameter location, creates this variable within inside the function that we assign the split of location. So location is most likely a URL, and we're splitting it by the forward slashes. So like here, if we split this URL, we would have 1, 2. I'm not going to count it, but have you seen how split works? Yeah, so far in the course.
Sorry, we know we haven't.
No, okay. Const test equals. Let's say we have my name. Right? If I do console.log, just change this to name. If you do name dot split, and in here I pass in I, then it's going to split that entire string.
So in split, but not in the context of string.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Array.
Right. Some arrays and strings share some methods like split. And if you haven't been told already, a string is just an array of characters. So the first character, first character can be found by doing something similar to what you would do with arrays. So the first index of array is 0, and therefore I get p at the beginning. Yeah, makes sense. Right, so yeah, splits it by whatever's on either side of the forward slash. And yeah, so here const resource equals split location, which should now be an array after using the split method. And then here we're getting the length of split location. So however many elements of that array there are, and then we're doing -1. Have you seen this way of accessing a value, an element in an array before? Yeah, so basically I'm just getting the last element in split location. So whatever is on the end of this forward slash, the last forward slash. Then you have the same string interpolation that I've showed before. It's put in the resource here at the end of this URL. Yeah, so here trying to access split location or resource would result in an error. So log split location. Split location is not defined. and the same should happen for resource. So here there's a slight modification where domain is defined in the global scope. And then it's used here. So now when we call this function, sorry. So you see at the end here, after the last forward slash, we have index.js, and we just derive that resource. That's what resource would be in this case, and you can see the output is mywebsite.com, which is the domain here, and resource at the end. So we've taken a string and deconstructed it, taken the end of it and added it onto another string. So we've created a new URL.
How did you locate that it's the index.js? Is it because the location split it takes away all the forward slash?
Yeah, so let's see if I can take this.
And then split location length would be everything excluding all the forward slash, right?
Yeah, so after we run split location, it'll probably end up being, well, I could just console log it, couldn't I? Console dot log this dot split by forward slash. So this is what we would get: HTTPS colon. Okay, we have a space there. Well,
So it actually creates
an array.
of strings.
Yeah. So remember, a string is still just an array of characters in a string format, basically. And when you run this method split, it breaks all of that up into pieces and puts it into an array of strings for you. So as you can see here, the last string here is index.js, and that's what we get when we call split location and get the last index.
Yes. Yeah, then when I saw the split it was 0 already. Yeah, we got it.
Yep.
Again, so we actually didn't see a split method. I think what we saw is a splice. Well, I mixed up. I thought it was like a splice method where all the forward dash slash are taking away. That's why I didn't understand, but now I understand. Got it.
Okay, yeah. Slice is a different array and string method. Any questions on scope still? Cool. Did that. Okay. So default arguments. Some functions don't need specific different values every time. We can specify default values for arguments. This allows for a function which could be called with some optional arguments. So here's an example. You have your typical function layout. So function keyword, the name of the function. We have a parameter here, user, and then we have another one here, minimum age, but here we're using the equal sign to assign a value to it. Right? So in this case, this becomes optional because we provided a default value of 18. So then when this function is run, if you only provide the user, it will just use 18 to do the comparison here, which is checking to see if the user's age is more than or equal the minimum age, which is 18. So we get that here when you say age verification, which is the name of the function, and right here it just passes this object with the key of age, excuse me, and a value of 20, and that is true because 20 is more than 18. And in this case, we do pass an additional argument, which is 21. So 21 then becomes minimum age, and then it therefore becomes false. Anything confusing about that so far? Cool.
Sorry, now I'm clicking on mute. Why is the first parameter into like brackets in the second line? Is something?
Why is this part in brackets?
Yeah.
Oh, this is just an object. So let me just copy all of this and go to the editor.
So user is an object.
Yeah. So it should have been user equals yeah, that's a bit clearer.
So there's no way, because I thought like the conditionality has to do with the fact that it's in the bracket, but it's just because it's an object.
Yeah, it's just an object. You don't always have to. So that was just done inline, but if this had more properties like height, weight, etc., then it would better to name it outside somewhere, and then pass the named variable into the function you want to use.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Any questions about this still? I guess one thing to note is you should leave any default parameters at the end. So maybe there's an example here. No, okay. Yeah, leave all your default variables at the end, because when the function gets called, it will read things in order. So let's see if I switch that with this should give me an error. Yep, cannot read property age of undefined because this object here, which is user, is being passed here as the only argument here and also the first argument here, whereas it's in a different order on here. So actually both of these are failing. Yeah.
There's no way to distinguish what is default or not, like just the fact that it's not there in one of the
Yeah. So in some other languages, like when you come to use the function, oh yeah, well in here I'm getting a tooltip to tell me um, exactly what's happening here. So it's expecting any for user, but we know that it should be an object with the age property. But then it has minimum age here, and it has, you see this question mark here? That's implying that it's optional.
Got it. Okay.
So this is the power of the code editor that you'll be using. Um, but in other languages, you probably clearly define that this is supposed to be an object and this is supposed to be a number. Yeah. Okay. I'll still do some more examples at the end if we have enough time. Okay, callbacks. I love callbacks. It says confusing stuff. I guess it was when I first learned them, but as it says here, it's just a function which is passed another function. So far we've been passing strings and objects, other variables to functions, but you can also pass a function to another function. And actually, we've probably seen that before because, console.log is a function, right? So if I pass this to here, it prints false. In this case, this function is actually getting called before, and so console.log is getting the value of it, but I'll go more into it now when we have our example. But yeah, just always remember a callback is just a function passed to another function. Okay, so have you seen set timeout before? So set timeout is a built-in function in JavaScript. So what it takes is that callback, which is a function. So it just takes the name of the function. Yeah, and it also takes an amount of time in milliseconds that it would take before it actually calls that function. Right, so let me just increase this to 10,000, which should be 10 seconds. So just saves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh. Okay, well, you've seen it didn't print right away. Maybe it didn't come properly, but that's what set timeout does. But the important thing to note here is that it takes that function as a callback and just runs it after a certain amount of time. So that's one example of a function that takes another function, or a function that's being taken by another function. So a function tell joke setup delivery set timeout after 5 seconds. What's So maybe you had a joke website and you wanted the joke to be told after a certain amount of time. You could start with the setup and eventually get to the delivery.
First you have the high.
Okay. I don't know what's wrong with this console. Set timeout should work normally, but it may be because this is just kind of a slower interaction with the console, or faster. Okay, never mind. Anyway, any questions so far that are not to deal with how set time works?
Not so recently.
Okay, we have some more examples. Yeah. Okay, so we have a function calculate that takes a number, calc1, I guess is short for calculation, and calc2. So it creates a variable result1 that calls this passed in calc1 function on number, and then you have result2 that calls this calc2 method function on the result1 that we just calculated, and then returns it at the end. So if we call calculate, we pass a number 15, and then we pass double, which should make it 30, and then decrease, which should make it 29. Sorry. Right. So in this case, we have two callbacks, and function calls both of them in different ways to get a result that it then returns. Any questions? No? What can we do to, let's say we always want to use double and decrease, what can we do here?
Sorry, what's the question?
Yeah, what if we don't always let's say we always want to first double the number and then decrease it. what can we do to this function up here to get that done?
So we're saying
I'm just um, making a callback, pun intended, to the thing we recently learned, which is default parameters. So we can come up here and say equals double, and then that equals decrease, and then we can come here and then just calculate 15.
calc 1. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So double here is the name of this function. So we have a callback, but we also have a default argument for that callback. Same with this one.
So that means, okay, it's already included, but then why don't we just put function calculate number and then have it implicit? You don't need to have it in as a second parameter.
Sorry, say again?
On line 56, would it work if we just put function calculate and then number on the bracket? And
On line 56.
yeah, if we just take out calc 1 and calc 2, would that work?
No, because what you need to remember is this is where we declare the function. So these names here, number, calc1, and calc2, those are just placeholder names, right? They don't actually have anything in them right away. What we're doing here now is assigning a default function to these. So
In that case, what would be the value for the parameter number on line 63? Because line 56 is calling the double function, but you still have no parameters in there.
yeah, so we for the same way if we wanted a default number, excuse me. Let's say we had const default number equals 15. We would just right. We would just sorry. We would put default number, right? We wouldn't put that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is like whenever I call the double function, I need a parameter, right?
Yeah. So that's the
Okay,
cool
so
thing about callbacks.
if I'm calling from line 56, I'm not specifying a parameter when calling double in there.
Oh, you're not actually calling it here. So this is just assigning. This what we're doing here is just saying calc1 is going to be this function, right?
But
So
that wouldn't work at this time, right? Because there's no parameter for double.
yeah, there's no parameter up there because we don't need to call it there. But within this function, we do calc1, and then we pass in the number here. So that's definitely the same as if we did double here,
Oh,
right?
I
So
see it now.
right here, just remember these are placeholder names. These aren't actual values here when you're declaring the function. These are just for us to use later on.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, okay. Sorry, so what I meant earlier is actually if you had on line 56 only number, and then you would replace in line 57, 58, rather than have calc 1 and calc 2, but you have
Yeah, if we just decided to call double and decrease within here, then we wouldn't need to have these parameters in here, these arguments here.
And why would we have so? Why wouldn't we do it this way, like where we actually just have double and decrease? Isn't it simpler to do it this way?
It is simpler, but let's say this function was part of a calculator we were building, and we didn't want to double and then increase. Let's say we wanted to decrease and then double, so we could just put decrease as the second callback and then do double. So that should be 28. Yeah. So now you have the flexibility
You can actually infer
to add other function. Yeah. So you,
yeah, I guess as it gets more complex, you need to have this kind of flexibility.
yep. You don't if you make a function, you're normally making it because you want it to be reusable across your code base, right? So I mean, normally you should uh, limit functions to doing one thing, but in this case it's doing two things, but that's fine because it's expecting to do two things here. It's taking two callbacks, so um, two things will happen. At least two things will happen. You get used to constructing functions for reusability, um, but this is like just scratching the surface, basically. Yeah, so this is an example of what we just did. And here, yeah, so let's say we wanted to add another function inline. There's nothing stopping us from doing that here. Function calc 3, sorry. Function calc 3 that takes another number and then returns that number by 3. Probably just put this somewhere else. But you've also seen that in console log as well. So, but in this case, console log is gonna, just print the declaration. Let me show a better example. Let's use decrease. Put that there. What am I doing wrong? Let's just copy the example. So, const result 2 equals that. So this function here, right, is just a declaration. So it's not actually being called here. It's being called when calculate does its thing right here. Make sense? Cool. Are callbacks still confusing? It's okay for them to be still confusing. Inline functions make them look even more confusing. Lots of brackets. When am I calling? When am I passing? Yeah, so yeah, you would normally try to avoid doing something like all of this. Okay. Any more questions before we move on to arrow functions?
Not for me.
Cool. Okay.
Ricardo, how's your tutorial going?
Okay. Alright. Now it's going to get even more confusing. Function declarations are the old way to create functions. Arrow functions are the new way, and they're less beginner friendly. Okay. So these are the three functions we just had a look at, and then we're going to go over to this. So we have the const keyword and the name of a variable, similar to how we create a normal variable, but we're actually assigning it to a function. So we open our braces here, we have our arguments, and then we have this fat arrow here, which is just the equal sign and this arrow here, and then we open the curlies, and then we have our logic inside. That's one way. Another way here is we only have one argument. So when you only have one argument, you don't need to use the braces. You have the fat arrow again, and because there's only one line, right, we don't need to use the curly braces. And if this is what we want to return, then we don't need to use the return statement either. We're going to try to do as many examples as possible so that we get this down. So yeah, instead of using the function keyword, we're using the fat arrow. As I said, one-liners don't need to use the return keyword or the curly braces. Functions with one parameter don't need the braces around them. And yeah, it's all really about reducing clutter, so making it a bit more concise to read. Okay, so let's just try changing these to the new arrow function syntax. So we can get rid of the function keyword. Let's always use const. So const calculate equals, then we have our arguments in braces, and then we have our fat arrow. Right? Again, we can remove our function keyword. We can use our const keyword, and we're assigning the this. You're using double as a name, and then we're passing one argument, but also like this is perfectly fine, but we can make it shorter. In fact, I'll just leave this since triple is a similar story. So again, no function equals, and because it's one parameter, let's remove those braces. We have our fat arrow, and then okay, that's another alteration. So const decrease equals, remove these, fat arrow, but then we also remove the curly braces. And we remove the return keyword. Right? Any questions so far? Shorter to write, nicer to look at. Not sure why this editor is still giving me braces, but depending on your code editor setup, you won't need to put the braces. You won't need to use them. Are you all using VS Code?
Yeah, we use
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Right. Any more questions on arrow functions?
I guess we need to practice to get the hang of it.
Yeah. Okay. I had some. Just play with some data very quickly. Because that's about it. Yeah. So there's some other things about arrow functions that you don't need to know right now. But when you get to stuff like React, um, you'll be told about them. So let's.
The question I have on that new way of writing the function,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we call it const, does it mean we could actually, does it mean that the function is now a type, or that it can be actually a let or something else, or?
You can use let if you want, but as usual, it's a function. It's not gonna change.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Use
I understand that. I just thought like, does this add something to the mix? Because before you only had function, you didn't have like a constant.
Yeah, it doesn't really add anything to the image per se. Function is just a different use of the keyword and syntax. Okay. So I just have some random data here, some people, some age, first name, last name, city. So we can just console.log people. Okay, this isn't very nice to look at. So I'll show you something you can do when you're working with an array of objects like this. You can do console.table, and you get a nice table here with some data that you can look at while you're playing with it. This is a flat object, meaning it doesn't have any nested, because you could have like another property here with an object in it with name, etc., right? Which might not look as great. Yeah, so you get object there, but if it's just an array of flat objects here like this, it's convenient to use console.table. So I'll just leave that there for us to look at while we're going through this. So what are some things we can do? So let's print all the names. Yeah. So you've done loops already, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's stop using function. Yes, you do const display display full names. Right? Let's say we just give it a list. Oh, you see I'm doing bad thing again. That's an arrow function. Display full names. So I guess you've seen this for loop. So list. So for let I equals 0, I is less than list.length, I plus plus, and let's say we create a variable here, const full name equals, let's take the the list I dot first name space, let's copy this, dot last name, and then we console.log full name. And let's just call display full names with people. So we've got all our names there. Okay, so we've done an arrow function for this. Let's make it so that we don't need to pass people if we don't need to. So we can make an optional, make a default argument here and just set list to people. Right. Okay. Let's say we only wanted the people in Greater London. How can we do that?
Put in a if statement, I guess.
Pardon?
In your for loop, you would add like an if statement that says if list.city list bracket I dot city is equal to Greater London.
Yep.
Then console log.
Yeah, that's good. If list I dot city equals to London, then we can wrap all of this logic in that if, and we only have these 4 people. Right. And as you can see, we're using scope correctly. You know, people is in the global scope. Full name is in this function scope. So I shouldn't be able to get full name from the outside. Okay, I'm going to show you another way of doing a for loop. Well, a loop. So you've done other array methods like array.push, and yeah, you mentioned slice and shift, etc. Yeah. Okay. So we can also do for each. Right. So list.for each. I'll give you the definition later. But so for each is a array method that you can use, and yeah, so as you can see here, it takes up to 3 arguments, and for each calls the callback function 1 time for each element in the array. Right? If you look at here, we have the first argument, which is the callback function. The second argument, which is you would get the index. So in, like, if we were comparing it to the for loop that we just made, it would be I. And then you also have the array for the third argument, so that's the entirety of the array. In this case, we're just going to use the callback function. So in here, we can do that. Yeah. So this right here is the same arrow function syntax you've been using, right? You have your fat arrow. You have where you would put your arguments if you have any, and you have your curly braces. Now, this callback, it will take, it will give you the like I said, it will give you each element in the array first. So let's call that person, right? You can also get the index, which I would normally do like idx, but I'm not going to do that now. So we have people, and then for each of the people, let's just copy this here. And we're going to say, instead of list I, we're not going to do person, right? And then if we do that, and let's just comment out this for now, and we get the same thing. So let's break this down even further so it's a bit more readable. Let's
You care about the I increment, so like I going up and down.
so with this for each, we don't need to, if we wanted to, we can get that I. So let's say, so remember this second argument is the index, right? So full name, let's put I at the beginning and then the full name. So you see you get the index number here. Yeah. So so far for an array method like for each, a callback, which is just this function, you pass it. It can become a very powerful and concise way to do something like a regular for loop. If you don't want to play with indexes or incrementing or using the length, that sort of thing. But yeah, let's say const get full name equals let's take first name and last name, and let's just, in fact, we can do this as a one-liner as well. So we just paste that there, but in this case we don't need the person. Right, so we have a get full name function that takes a first name and a last name and returns full name. So now we can also just call get full name person not first name person dot last name. Now I can probably make this even better by let me see. No, I shouldn't show you that. No. Okay, yeah, that's fine. What else can we do? Yes, the if statement you saw. What if we didn't want to use a if for whatever reason? Another array method you have is dot filter. So let's take that list again and use filter on it first. Right? This is another one that takes up to 3 arguments. In this case, again, we're just really concerned with the value. But the second argument is also the index, and the third one is also the array. So let's get with our arrow function again. Yeah, so let's say person again, and then what we want to do is check that if they're in the city of London. So what we can do here is person dot city is equal to Greater London. So as you'll know that this is a this is a comparison. So we're checking the city against Greater London. And basically we're just going to chain that on to filter. Now let me just put this on a separate line here, and it just works. So filter will return whatever your calculation will give you.
So the for each actually applies to the filter method.
Yeah. So to make this a bit more understandable, so let's do const persons in London equals list.filter, and then we would do persons in London dot for each. So persons in London is a new array we got from filtering out um, all the person objects that the city is equal to Greater London, and then we're taking this new array and calling for each on it, which does another set of work, and eventually prints our name city screen. And remember that this is a callback. Where can I add? Well, I've already put default parameters in here. We've discussed scope, and we have our arrow functions. Is there anything about what I've done here that is like absolutely blowing your mind, that isn't clear at all? Is there anything that isn't totally clear? So if we go to, I don't know if have you been shown MDM before?
I stumbled upon it like while I was doing exercise.
Okay, it's a really good place. So if you do JavaScript map function, normally like the first thing that pops up would be something from MDM. Oh no, well, W3 School's there, but
The other two I always go on.
so here you can get the same information. We define an array here, and then we call .map. This is your arrow function here. It takes that value and then multiplies it by 2. This is a really good resource to find anything you need to know about, especially array methods, but object methods as well. Everything about JavaScript. I think this is the best resource you can come to find anything you need to know. But I'm pretty sure you will come across these things. I only showed you .for each and filter. I want to show you map now, but okay, let's see. So .log. So if we just console.log people, we just get these objects, which isn't really helping us if we wanted to look at something quickly. What we could do is, say people.map. And what map does is takes your values, so let's person, and then whatever you return is whatever the new array is going to be. So if I only wanted the age of each person, then I'm just returning the age, and therefore I get an array of all the ages. right? So if in display if I had display first name as a function, const display first names equals list, and we could do list. Const new list goes, sorry, well, let's make that a bit more descriptive. List of first names display first names. Oops. No, I need to change this to first name, don't I? Yep, so callbacks are very useful, especially when you get to use the built-in JavaScript methods. Saves you having to do all of this. You can get down to 2 lines of work if you wanted to, or even 1 line. You honestly have to memorize any of these, but I'd say try using them in projects, because they'll be very useful when you actually start working, because you're not training to be designers where you just deal with HTML and CSS and a bit of JavaScript. A lot of the time you're gonna be dealing with data that you get from an API, so something similar to a list of people in a database, and you want to get all the ages and then perform a calculation on it. So you might have some API guys that don't really want to create a new endpoint for you that's just with the ages. They're going to send you this whole bunch of information with everything about the user, and you need to get an array of the ages so that you can do some more calculations on them. So map will come in handy, and you can just pass it a callback function.
What's the main difference between map and filter?
Filter, it uses sorry.
I think filter basically will evaluate something like a condition, but what
Yep.
will be the result of using map? Will you just change the elements on the array?
Yeah, it will basically so let's say I just wanted to const ruin or give them give them all my name so with map, whatever you do, it will perform whatever logic you're returning on every single element. So if I decided that I wanted to take every person and say person dot first name equals Patrick. And I'm trying not to be console.log. Oh, sorry, not console.log. Right here, we're going to return. We're still going to return that person. Return each person. So now I'm just going to console.log give them all my name. Oh yeah, sorry. I need to also return in this case I will just return list from here. Let's just console.table. Should not all of them have my first name. So it's a bit like what you would use for each, but in this case you know you want to directly manipulate that array. I mean, map will just return a new array, but in this case I'm just just returning what I've done to each and everything. Whereas in for each here, I'm just taking some information and console logging. I could very well use for each in the same manner here. But in this case, I would end up creating a variable, assigning the data to that variable, and then returning it. Whereas map will implicitly return this modification to this new array that I'm returning here. I feel like I rambled a bit, so let me know if I need to give a different example. Did that answer your question? Does filter, map, and for each, do they all seem different to you? Yeah. Yeah, hopefully they expose you to some of these methods, but it yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't learn this new. So the arrow functions were introduced in a later version of JavaScript. So I think when I started learning JavaScript, they weren't available yet. So I didn't learn them right away, and it's good that y'all are learning them early, because it'll just help you write code much faster and it's much more readable in my opinion. and having the word function everywhere. Default parameters, you might not use them that much, but they can be very useful. As you can see, if let's say I had some other function that, yeah, so give them all my name is taking it can take an array, but it has people as its default default value. So let's see, if I just move this up, just for my sanity, and for display first names, I pass just pass this in there. So I just have a bunch of Jareds there. And this is possible because, this is still returning a list, albeit it's a different list. It's just a list of strings instead of objects. And I'm passing that to display first names and like overriding this default argument. Yeah, so this using the default argument here becomes very flexible because it can, I can call it without anything if I wanted to, or I can customize it and get get even a filtered list of something. So yeah, maybe I should use that as an example. Let's take out persons in London from here. Let's call this get. Okay. Get persons in London, and for the sake of speed, let me just change this to people because it's going to be on the people. Let's update this so that it calls this method which returns an array, and then if we only wanted the Jareds that were in Greater London, then we could pass that get persons in London, and I think it's only 4 of them in here. Let me just, what are you complaining about? Get persons in London. Okay, let me just comment out for now. I'm not blind, right? This is the same name that I define right here, right? Get persons in London. Get persons in London. Oh, I'm not even, see? Context. That's a function now. Right, so I get 4 here. Display the first names of 4 persons in London. Sorry about that. So that should give you an idea of how much more flexible your code can be with callbacks and default parameters once you understand scope. Any more questions? Want any more examples?
No, I'm clear. Well, clear. The computer function that we had that
Yeah, I probably gave a lot of information that probably didn't have to, but hopefully it helps you in your exercises. I haven't seen them yet, so but I'll see if I can do them as well along with you, so that if you have any questions, you can ask me in the Slack.
cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Well, if there's no more questions, that's it. Sorry if this was a bit longer than the usual. Um, this will be my first time actually at least teaching online. I helped a few people a couple other times in my boot camp, but I haven't done a formal session like this before. So I hope it didn't confuse you or blow your minds or
No,
well,
sounds good. Thank you very much. And so in the end, what did you your age then?
oh, did everyone get to guess?
I'm gonna say 35.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm only 31, thankfully.
Oh, okay. So you're young.
Yeah.
You're older than you look.
Yeah. I normally get told I look 10 years younger. Maybe it's the beard I have now, but I normally get told I'm like about 10 years younger.
I guess my age then, I guess.
Oh, I haven't been looking. Um. Okay. Well,
True.
that's it. Do you want me? Do you want any of this code?
Well, I guess the lesson is gonna be as you say, it's gonna be registered so we can. So maybe yeah, I guess yeah. I was gonna say like you record it right, so we can actually have a look again at the video.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot this is being recorded. Damn.
And but yeah, if you can put the code maybe I don't know in the
Yeah, I'll put it in the Slack. I'll put it in a JS file and then put that JS file in this Slack.
cool. Sounds good.
Okay. You're welcome. All right.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Talk to you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.